Good morning. It is 11 o'clock on the dot, so let us begin. My name is Sean Mellows. I work for the International HIV and AIDS Alliance. I'm a person living with HIV, and it's a pleasure for me to chair this and moderate this session. I think that what we've heard at this conference is that combination prevention programs are effective. However, to have long-term and sustained impact on reducing new HIV infections, they must be tailored to the local context and work at the levels of the person, family, community, and society. These, according to UNAIDS, are rights-based, evidence-informed, and community-owned programs that use a mix of biomedical, behavioral, and structural interventions. And it's very interesting to see on the word map that there are some common biomedical aspects coming to the fore, such as PrEP and condoms, but also some of these structural interventions and behavioral interventions also coming to the fore. I am privileged and pleased to be joined by an excellent panel. We are going to try and make the session as interactive as possible, and I've asked the panel members to focus on the biomedical, behavioral, and structural aspects, and also to include the importance of young people, particularly young people living with HIV. So I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce themselves as opposed to me reading their impressive bios. And I think that we can begin first with Amaranta, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Buenos días. Soy Amaranta Gómez, soy de México, soy indígena y estoy participando ahora en esta conferencia.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amaranta. I'm coming from Mexico and belongs to the indigenous community. I'm very happy to participate in this conference.
And just to clarify, that isn't the voice of God. It is Javier Hurcade Belloc who's translating on behalf of Amaranta, and he's sitting in the front. So if you can't see him, he is in the front. Gracias, Amaranta. Grace?
Good morning. My name is Grace Kumwenda. I'm an HIV prevention advocate from Malawi. I work for an organization called Pakacheri Institute for Health and Development Communication. I work with key population on a project called Linkages. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Grace. Giovanni?
Oh, okay. So good morning, everyone. My name is Giovanni Ravasi, and I'm from Italy. I'm an infectious disease physician and public health specialist. I work at the Pan American Health Organization, the regional office of the World Health Organization, as regional advisor on care and treatment. So I'm pretty excited and at the same time worried to be on a prevention panel. But I think it helps to break the dichotomy of prevention and treatment. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Giovanni.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Cedric Ninahazwe. I'm Burundian. I'm the regional program manager at the Global Network of Young People Living HIV, known as Y+.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kasia Berderman, and I'm with an organization called Girl Effect. We're based in the UK. And I'm the Technical Director of Digital Research and Learning, which means that I oversee the research and the measurement of a variety of global ICT projects for the organization.
Great. Thank you very much to the panelists. Before we begin with the first speaker, who's Amaranta, who's going to talk about the person-centered perspective, can I ask you to vote on the second question in terms of who in your country is being left behind by HIV prevention efforts? And Amaranta, over to you.
Gracias a los organizadores de esta conferencia y en esta mesa. Y quisiera decir tres cosas que me parecen importantes. Por un lado, Venir a esta conferencia es conocer los avances significativos que tiene la prevención combinada, los avances de los medicamentos, pero también de cómo algunas poblaciones no están accediendo a estos avances.
Okay. Welcome everyone. I'm really grateful to be in this session and being invited to the conference. One of the things I want to raise is about combined prevention, but especially how some communities or populations are not accessing to combined prevention.
Las dos poblaciones que me gustaría resaltar de esta conferencia y que al parecer llegamos tarde a estos avances es la comunidad trans y la comunidad indígena.
I would like to highlight two communities that in some way we are getting the benefits of combined prevention late or have been left behind, and those two populations are indigenous populations and transgender people, or trans.
Me parece que uno de los grandes desafíos de estas conferencias es darse cuenta que hay poblaciones que apenas están siendo, se están dando cuenta que están siendo afectados por la propia epidemia, pero que además no tienen acceso a tratamiento. Y entonces pensar que con tratamiento no puedan transmitir el VIH, como ya se dice aquí, eso es bastante remoto, o por lo menos en los próximos 20 años pudiese ocurrir.
It's important to all of us to realize that there is huge issues about access, and many people who are here even struggle to access, and the majority of people who are not here from our community, our population, do not have access to combined preventions and other strategies.
Y me parece también que otro de los temas que es importante abordar es que cuando hablamos de prevención combinada, cuando hablamos de acceso a la salud, también tenemos que hablar sobre problemas estructurales.
And it's very important that when we speak about combined prevention and when we speak about access to health, we should never ever forget about the structural barriers we face.
Estructurales en el pensamiento social.
It's also about how social beliefs are around and create structural barriers.
Porque al hablar de personas trans, por ejemplo, hay un imaginario social que solamente se piensa que los únicos reductos posibles de desarrollo para las personas trans es la prostitución o el estilismo.
I think that there is a general perception that for trans people, the only way they can evolve in their own personal life is around sex work or prostitution and working in beauty parlors.
Cuando en realidad hay muchas más posibilidades, hay muchas más capacidades alrededor de las personas trans. Y creo firmemente que para hablar de acceso a tratamiento, acceso en general, debemos de exigir al Estado y a la sociedad el reconocimiento de la plena ciudadanía de las personas trans alrededor del mundo.
And it's important so that we realize that there are many other skills and work that transgender people are doing around the world. And it's important to remember governments or states that trans people need to have access to full citizenship.
Afortunadamente, he observado en estos 20 años de activismo que el imaginario social sobre las personas trans y lo indígena se va modificando. Hoy podemos ver a personas trans alrededor del mundo siendo profesoras, siendo diputadas, siendo activistas, siendo cantantes, siendo deportistas. Y entonces el mapa social, el imaginario social ayuda a que empecemos a mirar a las personas trans con una mirada más ciudadana y desde sus propias capacidades.
What I witnessed in the last 20 years working on these issues is that now transgender people are working in different dimensions. They are artists, they are activists, they are professionals, and many other kinds of work. So we are now helping for people to have a different perception as a transgender contribution to the response and also to being full citizens.
Finalmente, quiero cerrar diciendo que dos elementos que tendrían que ser considerados para cualquier respuesta al acceso a tratamiento, al acceso a prevención temprana, tiene que ver con pensar en la interseccionalidad y la interculturalidad como dos ejes fundamentales para que las personas no queden fuera o en definitiva, las personas trans y en este caso las personas indígenas no lleguemos tarde al acceso en general.
I want to have two last reflections. The first one is about, don't forget about thinking on intersectionality and interculturality. So transgender people, indigenous transgender people will not access to health very late.
Y decir que para nosotras y nosotros el concepto trans es una categoría política y esa categoría política es necesaria que se reconozca como tal para la búsqueda de esa ciudadanía que necesitamos tener.
So it's also important, finally, it's also important to convey the message to you that the concept about trans is a political concept. And it's a political concept which is strictly linked with citizenship. So please don't go out of this session thinking about trans as a political concept which is linked to citizenship, the right of citizenship. Thank you.
Gracias, Amaranta. I think what you're also highlighting is one of the challenges when it comes to being able to access services is the issue of language. And I think that the conference in many ways has unfortunately silenced many voices because the conference is held in English. And so I thank you for being willing to participate in the panel discussion and contributing your voice to this important session. Grace, we've asked you to talk on the structural barriers, and you come from Malawi. Can you share some of your reflections on what you think the structural barriers to prevention are?
Thank you so much, Sean. And as you've rightly indicated, I think implementing combination prevention, it requires us, or perhaps demands us, to actually look at social cultural issues, the legal environment, and factors that are basically taking communities away from prevention services. So for us in Africa, but also in Malawi, when we're looking at combination prevention, we are looking at how do we make the environment enabled enough to bring individuals towards services. So I'm going to share about three things that I think are very critical. The first one being legal issues, policy environment. I think as we're implementing prevention, we need to look at how do we reform the laws that we have. We are sitting in times and age where at this moment so many countries still have very restrictive laws. We have laws, including in my own country, in Malawi, where same-sex relationships are criminalized. We are sitting at a time when certain aspects of sex work is criminalized. And we're also looking at issues of young women, where for them to access HIV testing services, there are issues of consent from parents. So we need to look at all these legal issues, policy issues, and say, how do we start reforming them towards promoting access to services for several populations. And the second thing for me that is very critical are issues of stigma and discrimination. I know we've made some headway towards addressing issues of stigma, but we're still very far away. Right now, as we see it, you have healthcare systems that are still stigmatizing key populations. We have healthcare systems that are not friendly to young people. So we need to look at how do we start shifting attitudes as individuals, as communities, as systems. How do we start shifting those attitudes such that someone who is accessing services can comfortably actually access those services. We do need to start thinking about training healthcare providers. We do need to start thinking of training other service providers, people who are supposed to be protecting us, who are not actually doing their job. So we need to look at all those factors to make sure that services are actually accessible. And finally, for me, the other third and one of the most critical things are issues of gender inequality and issues of poverty. And I think as we're implementing biomedical prevention, as we're distributing condoms, as we're talking about PrEP, we need to be aware, we need to be cautious of the fact that a lot of women are experiencing intimate partner violence. 1/3 of the population of women have accessed violence at a certain point in their lives. And it is a fact that for a woman who is accessing violence, it's very difficult for them to be empowered enough to access prevention service or even care and treatment services. So we need to be looking at all these intersectionalities. We need to be looking at all these issues that are basically putting people away from services that they're supposed to be accessing. So for me, looking forward, as we're moving forward, we need to look at how do we start investing in structural interventions. Because the truth of the matter is, sometimes it's a bit easier for us to look at biomedical interventions because we see numbers, how many condoms do distribute, how many people access PrEP. It's a bit easier for us. But the structural interventions demands long-term thinking. So the results might not be immediate, but continued investment in this element, in structural interventions, will get us towards the 2020 targets. And finally, also, when we're thinking about this, we do have certain policies in our countries across the globe that are promoting good, positive behaviors to access services. I think what is very critical is how can governments now start implementing those policies? Because we might have them on paper, but what are we doing to actually get people, the policies themselves being implemented? So at the end of the day, as finally, I think we need to do whatever it takes at all costs to make sure that people are accessing services. We need to be addressing these issues because we cannot get there if we're just looking at this from one perspective. We need behavioral interventions, we need biomedical interventions, but most importantly, we also need to be looking at the structural issues around them. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Before you hand over the microphone, I am going to push you a little bit because I think that we need to move beyond some of the rhetoric when it comes to combination prevention. We understand that there is a gap between policy and action, and we understand that we need to invest more in combination prevention. But what do we, as the collective we, need to do differently to make that case for investment? Because it clearly isn't happening yet. So how do we get the governments to invest in addressing structural barriers in combination prevention?
I think one of the most important arguments for me is to basically look at where we are. We have targets. If you look at the pace that we're moving towards achieving those targets, we need to start bringing in partners and government to say, why are we not moving at the pace that we're supposed to move? We are distributing condoms, where PrEP is accessible in some countries, and there's some progress in biomedical interventions. But we need to look at now, as a government, are we doing enough in terms of now investing in structural interventions? The case, for instance, in Malawi, one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we start costing structural interventions? How do we actively start looking at how much does it take for us to actually implement these interventions? And what are these specific interventions that we're talking about? So I think as government, what we need to look at is how far have we come? Are we achieving the results? And if we are not achieving the results, what is the gap? And I think the gap is what we're basically talking about, the structural interventions, and then start seeing what can we practically do to move forward with this agenda. Okay, great. Hopefully in the audience discussion, we are going to get some of your ideas on how we can address some of these structural interventions, but also how we can address the challenge of
funding for structural interventions. Giovanni, I'm moving over to you now. Biomedical aspects of combination prevention, is it really easier?
So I think, well, it's clear from this panel that biomedical interventions are an essential component, but they're not sufficient. And I think with regard to biomedical intervention, we need to do a reality check. I will refer to the reality of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is where I work and where I'm most familiar with, and we are seeing the same stagnant incidence of cases and up to 78% of new infections in key populations and their partners. So really focused intervention, prevention intervention are even more critical. But the reality is that not all countries are offering the full range of biomedical interventions, and many of them are not up to the scale that they should be. We did an assessment of prevention strategies, and really with few exceptions of early PrEP adopters and combination prevention champion countries, and I want to name them because it's really important. Brazil in Latin America, Bahamas, Barbados in the Caribbean, most countries are not offering all available interventions, and especially PrEP and non-occupational PEP. And considering that most countries have concentrated epidemics, these are really important gaps. But having early adopter countries is also key because they demonstrate that implementation is possible, they generate lessons learned, and Latin America and the Caribbean is a region where solidarity and horizontal cooperation is always been a value, and I think that's a strategy that we need to promote more and more. But just to go through some of the other gaps or reality check, there have been great progress in ART coverage, but still 1 out of 4 countries have not yet adopted the treat all policy. And we know that there's an emerging drug resistance issue, problems with engagement in care, quality of care. So it's still there's still quite a gap to reach that 71% of people living with HIV with a vital suppression to benefit from treatment as prevention on a population level. Also, we know that PrEP works. But up until now, only 3 countries have included PrEP in their combination prevention strategies. But many more countries are really making an effort and implementing demonstration projects. But to a certain extent, these small-scale demonstration projects are instrumental to phase in, but they're also, in a way, delaying a more full-scale implementation, and maybe countries could be bolder, and there's enough evidence to really push this as a public policy in the public sector. Only 1 out of 3 countries is offering non-occupational PEP, and there's not much awareness in the community about non-occupational PEP. HIV testing services really need to be taken to a whole new level of innovation as far as technologies and also service delivery models. Male condom programs have been the pillar of biomedical strategies, but really, again, they need to be enhanced with adequate programming to the needs of the populations and adequate distribution. And we can also go on and on about all the issues of integrating mental health and STI management and sexual and reproductive health. So I think programs really have to recognize what works and offer the whole range based on the evidence of their epidemics and make an effort to really reach that person-centered prevention approach that we are unpacking in this panel and addressing the structural barriers to access. And as a final comment, I think we can always improve biomedical prevention, and we're waiting for long-acting PrEP, and we're waiting for a vaccine. So not forgetting, keeping investing in research and development, because we can always do better.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Giovanni. If I could also ask you, I think what's very clear from this conference is that we do have the evidence, we have the tools, and there's general consensus about what works in terms of reducing new infections. But why are we still failing to do so?
So, yes, from the estimates, new infections are not going down, but I think we can be optimistic. We are gathering more and more evidence about what works and how to deliver it, especially how to deliver it. But one thing, I think health systems are not yet fully responsive to the real needs of populations and communities. I think the person and community-centered approach is an excellent principle, and I think it has become part of the language at this conference. But it also requires profound health system transformations that are still happening in most cases. And also, I think part of this discussion is recognizing the differentiated models of prevention that should guide national strategies to deliver to key populations, to indigenous peoples, to migrants and displaced populations, men, women, adolescents, and so on. And I think there's clarity that many peer-led and community-based interventions are demonstrating higher uptake, and they're being more successful than facility-based interventions, and there's a lot to learn about that. The universal health strategy really pushes for strengthening interventions at the first level of care, and this includes community systems and community-based interventions. And there's one target that it's not the glamorous 90-90-90, but it's part of the UNAIDS strategy that it's 30% of HIV services by 2030 should be community-based. Yeah. So I think this should be should be measured more, should be discussed more with ministries of health. And again, there are many successful experiences, promising experiences, but not all of them are published in peer-reviewed journal, or not all of them arrive at world conferences. So promoting communities of practices at local level, sub-regional or regional level, I think it's something that we should work together, agencies, programs, civil society, to facilitate that exchange of successful experiences.
Great, thank you, Giovanni, and I look forward to hearing some of the audience's perspectives on why you think there are still so many HIV infections and we're simply not winning the battle. Moving on to Cedric, as a young person living with HIV, I've kept this slide on intentionally until it was your chance to speak, because the question was, in your country, who's being left behind by HIV prevention efforts? And there were only 5 people in the audience who thought that people living with HIV are being left behind in HIV prevention efforts. Do you agree with that?
No, of course. I think I will start by recognizing Grace's intervention in terms of policies and some restriction in terms of getting access to services, and say that personally I still don't understand why we still have this, we are always argumenting on this key population human right just as a word, where people are developing policies, and we forget to go to the fact that we have these people in the country. I'm referring to government and decision makers, and especially in my region. I think we all know how difficult it is now in Tanzania and in some also other countries to even talk about human rights and key population. I don't really understand what politicians think about this. Why we have key fact in country that we have these people and then we need to get them access to services. It's something that I still wonder why and how do we want to get. You know, we are promoting health and well-being in our country. We are promoting that. We are trying to achieve the SDGs, but we fail to go to the fact that we are failing to address the needs of people that we have in our own country. That's my second reflection. My first reflection. The second reflection I want to highlight before I go to the point that we are lefting behind people living HIV is that ourselves as stakeholders in HIV response, how we are addicted to numbers and trying maybe to please to donor, especially pharmaceutical. I know in Burundi, and I had also the same cases happening in Kenya, where we are working with, I don't want to name the organization, we are trying to make sure that especially sex workers are using the self-testing to identify people living with HIV. And they're sending them to the hot spot. And the mission is to find people living HIV. In this stage, I don't know how we can find people living HIV as we are looking for golden or money somewhere. We can know that if you look for money, you can know that you can go to the bank. But where can you find a person living HIV? And we are having number, that's our, can I say, falsified in somehow. And we're using this number. And because of also, we have in mind that, yes, we want to prevent by any means. And also we have to include key population. But the question is, how are we working with this key population, especially sex workers and gay men? We want, I don't know, we want to plead donors. We want to look for numbers to present to donors. And we forget that we are also working with human beings, and we need some approaches that involve the orientation and maybe how we can address peer-to-peer issues, not just to please donors and to please what we, looking for numbers. I don't know if I'm being very clear in terms of what is happening. And thirdly, people living HIV are not left behind. I already said no. And my example is, let's maybe in our own country take one health facility. And I know in my own country, if a young person living HIV get pregnant, for instance, automatically there is a fact that she will have to change the health facility because there is stigma around this. And people still thinking that young people living HIV, I don't know what they take this idea, that they are asexual. But the fact is that we have many cases in many countries, but just go to the health facility and we find how many young people living HIV are, how many unwanted pregnancies we're having there. And this is the fact that we are not thinking, in a right way that also these young people have the right, the fundamental right as other human beings. And we are denying them some key, the fundamental right, at least to get the information, only the information, and then the choice will be theirs. And also getting to emphasizing on the fact that people living HIV, we still think that because of also discrimination, and the problem is not, is not for people it's not around the HIV center, it's not around the HIV facilities, it's also among ourselves. We keep thinking that, for instance, myself, when I was presenting my girlfriend that time, the first question is she HIV positive as yourself? This is the first question that these young people are getting, when you try, to make progress in your life. And it's like people, the only thing that people can see you is that you are a potential HIV transmitter, if I can say that. And this is that's how discrimination starts, from the family to the community. And at the health center, they think that maybe the only thing that we need to provide to people living HIV is only medication. But they are human beings, and they do live their lives as other people. I don't want to go further and talk about how also this pharmaceutical maybe innovation are trying to think that people living HIV maybe are animals, but this is maybe another subject we should discuss in another panel. But just to conclude that, let's not forget that we have evidences, as you say, and we have these key populations, including people living HIV in our country. And we know that they know how they can address their needs. And let's, in every kind of programs that we are trying to develop and implement, make sure we are working with them, not trying to involve in them to reach numbers. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Merci, Cedric. Thank you very much. I think it's important that you highlight that we must be careful of just chasing the numbers for the sake of chasing the numbers. And I think it's helpful for us to explore a little bit more when we come into the panel discussion on what role people living with HIV can and should play in HIV prevention efforts beyond just being, as you called them or called us, HIV transmitters. So we will explore that, and I'm also interested to explore with the audience who the other category is in this question, because I thought that we had covered the majority of populations, but clearly we did not. We're going to move on to the next question on the Mentimeter, which is, which of these combination prevention elements do you think receives the most funding currently? And then I'm also going to ask Kessia, we've also seen at this conference that the evidence of the impact of HIV on adolescents is huge. You work for Girl Effect and use ICT to empower adolescents and young people. Can you share a little bit more about why you think it's so important and why it's relevant?
Sure. Thanks, Sean. I'd like you to first imagine with me that you are a 15-year-old girl and you are living in Johannesburg. You're thinking about becoming sexually active with your boyfriend, but you are worried about HIV. You live a bit of an isolated life. You've dropped out of school, so your social support and your social structures are a bit limited. You do have friends, but you're worried that if you ask your friends about HIV, they'll just laugh at you because you don't know enough. You live with your grandmother because your mother works far away. And you're worried that if you ask your grandmother about these things, she'll say you just shouldn't be thinking about these things yet. So what do? But today it's 2018, and you have something that might not have been available to you 5 years ago if you were in the same situation. You have a mobile phone. And as Sean said, I'll be talking about the role of ICTs for girls and young women. If ICTs is a bit of just an acronym for you, I'll just unpack it really quickly. It's Information and Communication Technologies. That includes websites, it includes computers. I'll be really focusing on mobile phones, on cell phones, because for many places in the world, actually the use of mobile phones is far and above, much more common than it is computers or laptops. So, Girl Effect, we use mobile technology and media in order to empower girls. And I want to talk about 3 big concepts that we've observed in the use of ICTs amongst girls. And these are the concepts of presence, privacy, and control. So this concept of presence, when we're thinking about ICTs are really enabling because they do empower us in a new way to think about ways to meet girls where they are in ways that are new and actually have a lot of exciting opportunities for us. So mobile access overall amongst all populations is increasing year on year. And we're finding that meeting people where they are, meeting girls where they are, it's really, really easy to weave messages about HIV amongst other things on mobile platforms. Using platforms where girls already are is really crucial, and using pieces of technology that they're using is really crucial. And it's important to integrate these things into the platforms where girls already are, because it also acknowledges that girls live very complex lives. And they are not perhaps just interested in HIV, they're also interested in relationships, they're interested in other topics as well. And so when you have broader platforms that allow you to weave in these messages, it's a really powerful way to reach girls. The second issue I'd like to talk about is the issue of privacy. And we know that stigma and fear often prevent girls from accessing services. And in a private space, they can actually talk about more sensitive information. And using technology, it's really possible for the first time ever to have these one-to-one conversations at scale. We're piloting a new technology now, a chatbot, which is a simulated conversation using artificial intelligence to simulate real-life conversations, and it makes these conversations more relevant to girls, and it also enables us to use anonymity, to enable girls to feel very comfortable, and very crucially, it enables us to allow girls to practice having conversations in a private space and to then encourage them to have these conversations with real people in real life, as we say. The last element I wanted to talk about was control. And we know that in many places, girls do have limited options. But with a phone, a girl really has the opportunity to control her own learning. She decides what she's interested in, and she can use the information to make new choices. And so her world broadens in this way. So ICT offers a lot of opportunity for us, but I don't want to make it sound like it's all rosy. We know that there are significant challenges with ICT and access. There is still very much a gender digital divide, and the access that boys have is often more than girls have. And a lot of girls are borrowers of phones as well, instead of being owners, and that makes a significant difference in the way that you can design your digital intervention. There's structural issues as well. We know that these are very real issues around electricity and other types of access. And in many families, if a boy has a phone and a girl has a phone, the boy might have more access to the electricity, for instance, to charge the phone than the girl does. So we have to think about these things as well. But at the same time, ICTs are a tool, and they're not an end in and of themselves. And it's our responsibility to use the tool to create new ways to engage with girls and young women and to create really positive spaces online. It's not just about the phone, it's about how we use the phone to empower girls and to enable them to actually meet the challenges that they have in their everyday lives.
Great, thank you very much, Kessia. I now want to try and bring you into the discussion as well, please, audience. So if you have questions or comments, please come to one of the microphones and engage in the discussion, either by asking or reflecting on some of the comments that you've heard from the panelists, or also reflecting on some of the questions that we're struggling with in terms of why are we still struggling with prevention to get the infections down. I'll take a first round of questions, and then I'll ask the panel to reflect, and then we'll come back for a second round. Microphone in the front, please, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Amaranta, muchas gracias por estar aquí también. Es un gusto para nosotros. Mi colega, la maestra Elena Guadarrama y yo somos de México también y me da muchísimo gusto escucharte. My name is Lourdes Villanueva. I am from Mexico and I work in the international network FAMECOM as a civil association. I would like to share with you some comments about what have been the actions we have made in Mexico. We have implemented different projects with a combination prevention approach. We give condoms, lubricants, workshops about stigma and discrimination, and training to the main actors about, involved in health services attention. These activities are organized to impact key population and vulnerable groups. Those projects are sponsored by National Center to Prevent and Control HIV and AIDS. As part of the methodology of intervention, we do a baseline before activities, and after of this, we do an end line, which it allows to measure the impact of the activities. Sometimes the problem in our country is that there's not enough fund to do the activities, and the time for implement these activities is insufficient. So our country is working hard in civil or society under this approach, besides the structural issues and problems that as a country we have. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much. Coming to this side of the microphone.
Hi,
of the room.
Amaranta también, es un gusto verte otra vez y felicidades en tu bonita presentación. My name is Steven Diaz. I'm also from Mexico.
Oh, we have a lot of Mexicans here today.
It's a Mexico delegation here.
Bienvenido.
Gracias. Giovanni, I like you very much, but I'm going to take umbrage with something you said about publishing in peer-reviewed journals. I think that we have a very good community-level intervention for HIV treatment and diagnosis. However, every time we've tried to get published in a peer-reviewed journal, it's been rejected. It is, well, this is not something of our interest. This is something that perhaps you should search for another journal. Then journals charge a lot of money to get published. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like a tyranny system. It's a tyrannical system where mostly Canadian, US-based, and Western European reviewers are the ones that are deciding whether your project and your work is worthy enough for their publishing. And if it's not in Lancet, then you have no international respect. So that's just my comment.
So can I ask you how you think we need to change that?
I think that perhaps other publications should be included in these forums. I mean, not just those who are, the popular ones, AIDS, Lancet, the American Journal of Public Health. But I think that local and regional publications, such as, for example, in Mexico, we have several publications of peer-reviewed journals, most of them in Spanish, by the way, not in English. So, and I think that you made a very good point at the beginning. The language, it is a barrier, and in the publishing world, language is also a barrier because we only look at English or French publications. We don't look at very many other languages, and let alone Asian languages or African languages.
Thank you. Giovanni, do you have any
I'm not
solutions?
Sure. Well, no, we don't disagree. I actually mentioned that, unfortunately, many good experiences don't arrive in peer-reviewed journals. And, well, the Pan American Health Organization has a regional public health journal where you can publish in Portuguese, in Spanish, and English. And the other suggestion was to have communities of practices that don't necessarily need to be published in journals, but is a way to share successful and promising experiences.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yes, please, sir.
Good morning, Emery Mpoate, originally from DRC, but I'm working in 5 different countries in Africa. I've been involved in the HIV response since 1996. It was a time I thought that we have failed because looking at figures and so on. But I think we did not fail, but we have reached a point where we need to change. We need to see things differently. I want to add about on the intervention of my sister who talked about structural and so on. Mm-hmm. I think especially in sub-Saharan Africa, something we need to deal with first of all is ownership. There is no ownership, there is no commitment. Mm-hmm. I'm working with an organization which we are providing technical and financial support to 5 different countries in Africa. Whenever I am, it is the program for that partner who sent me. It's not a program for that country, for instance, in Tanzania, in Nigeria, in South Sudan. So I think the first point we need to take into consideration is the commitment, the ownership. We need to understand, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, that AIDS, HIV/AIDS, it is our problem. We need to commit ourselves and then ask others to help us. But what I've noticed for more than 15 years in those countries, there is zero commitment, even in the level of the government. Really, what I know in South Africa, they have really a very good commitment and the government is putting enough resources. But in other countries, I can say it's less than 0%. So we need to start there. To bring our government, to bring everybody to understand it is our problem. Then prevention is really a big problem in Africa, also because people are thinking that it is not my problem. You are the one who are coming to tell me I have to use condom. Some have been telling me, can you change your stuff? How can I use it the time I'm ready to have sex? I have to stop and put that thing which will just take away the desire I have. So I think we need to dig deep, to have a serious discussion in order to see all the preventive measures, all the approaches we are using in the prevention, how we can make it fit in different cultural environment. Another thing is the culture.
Can I ask you to be brief, please?
Yes, I'm ending there. It's about the culture which has been used as
an excuse.
Guinea goat, escape way. Mm-hmm. It is not for our culture. Yeah. So that's why I want to put it in those who are dealing with politicians to see what is our culture. I think here we are talking about life. We are not talking about culture. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Grace? No commitment from African governments?
I think I totally agree with him to a lot of extent. And just to add as well, because when we talk of ownership, there are several levels we need to look at. We need to look at, first of all, government ownership, as indicated. And I want to kind of problematize the discussion a little bit. Because when we talk about combination prevention, we want also at the same time to look at who is actually coordinating and checking if our governments are actually rolling that out. Mm-hmm. Because we can talk about it, we can have it in our papers, in our policies and documents, but the ownership need to be monitored and tracked to actually see that government is taking that ownership beyond the commitments that they've actually made. But the other element that I wanted to just quickly add on is the ownership around communities now. Mm-hmm. I think it's very, very critical that communities should own these programs. Mm-hmm. We've heard from so many panels that interventions that are laid by communities, peer models, are working better. Can we have communities owning these processes? Can we go beyond targets? Can we start seeing the faces and the human beings around these issues? So it's very, very important that we talk of ownership across different levels as well.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Grace. Yes, please, ma'am.
Yes, my name is Leanne Evanson. I'm a public health consultant. And I actually want to speak a little bit to that because I have a problem with I've come to have a problem with the notion of combination prevention as a concept, because I think the rights-based approach really kind of pulls in all of the things that an individual or a community would need to protect itself. And but that also requires us to agree what the rights are. Do I have a right? And who has the right to who has rights? So poor people, but certain kind of poor people, not MSM, not poor sex workers. If they move and they are tailors, then they have the right to be respected as a poor person. And then things around rights to housing. We haven't talked about the issues around the structural issues around poverty and inequity, and unpacking what that means in terms of what do people have a right to, and how do we define that, and what are our commitments to it. So, because when we talk, I just keep thinking about in the United States, I work with a program that works with sex workers and drug users. They're not worried about their HIV status. They don't know where they're going to sleep tomorrow. So us having these conversations and saying, well, use a condom, here's some clean works. It's not respecting we are not actually coming to them where they're at, because we're not listening, we're not respecting, and we're not trusting them. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
If you could stay at the microphone, please, and if I could just ask you a follow-up question. So if you struggle with the concept of combination prevention, and are you saying that we need to integrate the language of human rights stronger in our discussions?
Absolutely, that we should be looking at this as, rights-based prevention. So we start with what are some of the basic needs that people have, and listening to them and to the communities that say, actually, we need to look at food. Mm-hmm. And we have plenty of research that shows food insecurity impacts adherence. Mm-hmm. We have seen that housing insecurity increases risk exponentially within sex workers in India. Those studies have been done, but it also requires a lot more commitment and doing things that aren't testing, that aren't, that our donors aren't going to. This is also part of the problem. Donors don't agree to this. Housing, supportive housing for drug users is hard. And so I think that this is where we need to, if we are going to get to where we need to be, we need to unpack this.
Right. Amaranta, can I ask you to reflect a little bit on the comments that we've just received from the floor in terms of that we need to introduce human rights language stronger in our approach to prevention?
Sí, en esta última intervención de la compañera se me viene a la mente justamente la categoría de ciudadanía nuevamente, porque en la medida de lo posible, en la medida en que podamos reconocer a las personas como ciudadanos plenos de derechos, habrá posibilidades de que puedan tener acceso temprano a PrEP y a otras cosas.
Reflecting on what I heard from my colleague in the floor, it's again come the concept about citizenship. If we can continue working for people and our communities to have the realization of the rights as citizens, they will definitely have better access to PrEP and other interventions. But we need to keep speaking about what the colleague has said from the floor.
Y pienso y me preguntaba hoy en la mañana, un empleo a una persona trans, un empleo distinto a la prostitución y al estilismo, ¿le haría feliz a una persona trans? Y me respondí, por supuesto, porque habría una autonomía económica. En ese proceso de autonomía económica habría un proceso de autoestima también que incrementaría la posibilidad de la exigibilidad de sus derechos.
And this morning I was wondering, I asking myself if it's a transgender person or a trans person have access to a different job opportunity beyond sex work, prostitution. It's if this will help into their self-esteem to have the opportunity to do different kinds of jobs, and that will have a correlation, will be linked to better access to health and prevention.
Lo mismo me preguntaba si alguna persona trans o indígena pudiese tener la oportunidad de ir a una universidad, también podría cambiar su vida y podría tomar mejores decisiones si viviera con VIH y acceder a PrEP temprano.
On the same line, if a transgender person will also have access to formal education, to a degree in universities, this will also bring enough information and empowerment to have a better access to prevention, to care for transgender people with a university degree living with HIV.
John, paradójicamente, cuando venimos a esta conferencia y en esta plenaria, estamos hablando de prevención combinada o PrEP temprano para las personas, que puede significar que la muerte no sea el destino temprano, pero para las personas trans en América Latina, paradójicamente, el promedio de vida, John, es de 18 a 34 años de edad. No podemos estar no llegamos a la vejez, por ejemplo, y entonces, ¿tiene sentido PrEP cuando me matan a una edad temprana?
There are other issues that are related to trans person and it's survival. I mean, the average age among transgender people in Latin America is 18 to 34. So PrEP and other strategies make sense for a trans person that could be murdered or could not reach the age of age beyond 34 years old.
Finalmente, las y los indígenas en el mundo, por lo menos en este momento en Nueva Zelanda, Canadá, Australia, Venezuela, Colombia, tienen datos en donde están diezmando a comunidades indígenas y en estas conferencias no se les sigue considerando como a población clave. Y yo creo que eso es una gran brecha de la que tenemos que hablar. ¿Por qué la negatividad o por qué la negación de las instituciones, los gobiernos, las agencias, las farmacéuticas, las agencias científicas? Esto que decía Steven sobre quién valida qué información sí es científica o no. Ahora mismo hay colegas míos indígenas, profesionales que han generado datos y les cuesta mucho trabajo justamente ser validados y no se considera científico porque no hay una firma de una revista que les pueda validar eso.
And finally, I would like to reflect on how indigenous populations have continue to be murdered or are victims of sort of genocide related to HIV in our regions, and she listed all the countries where that happens, and she also shared with Stephen the issue of how the scientific community undermine the research and the evidence that civil society communities, indigenous populations are gathering, are collecting, and who they are to define what is scientific or not.
Gracias, Amaranta. So almost reinforcing and amplifying the comments from the floor and also making them very visible. Yes, please, sir.
Hello, everybody. Buenas tardes, Amaranta. Mi nombre es Ismael Calderón. Soy de Venezuela, viví en Colombia y ahora radico en Estados Unidos. It's a pleasure for me here. Yes, yes. I'm going to talk about that. Voy a hablar de eso, actually. Es un placer que estés aquí. this means a lot to me that she is here because I born in Venezuela, I was living in Colombia, now I'm living in the United States, and now I can understand the differences between this kind of narrative and this kind of narrative from the person who is from the United States. So it's hard sometimes to find a bridge, a language bridge to understand each other, but it doesn't mean that we can do it. I'm a gay person. Right now I'm working for the Lutheran Church in America. It's an inclusive church. That's important when pastors can get married, so that's important for me. But also it's important because we are working for inclusion, and one of the reasons that I'm here is because as a leader, religious leader, I can say I'm gay, I can fight for inclusion and other people like transgender people, etc. Next month, I'm going to start my seminary. I'm going to be a pastor. So I'm thinking about what it's going to be a Lutheran pastor, a Christian pastor in this context. And that's the reason I'm here. So I want to ask you, to ask Amaranta, how religious leaders can start working with this kind of things in Latin America where we still can talk about sex. We can talk about inclusion. As a Latin American person, as a US person, I have that dilemma. So my question is that, what can you tell me to keep working for Latin American people in there, actually in the United States, and actually I'm working for migrants. So we have these kind of things together. Thank you.
Gracias. Amaranta, I'm going to ask you to reflect on that, but I'm also going to ask Cedric if you also want to reflect on what we can do differently, particularly in Africa and in Latin America, around involving religious leaders more in the prevention efforts. Amaranta?
Yo creo que uno de los desafíos que hemos tenido siempre en este trabajo, porque al final de cuentas el VIH se volvió el caja de Pandoras, que abrió el tema de la sexualidad, la corporalidad y muchas otras cosas que no solamente religiosamente son tabú, sino también en muchas culturas nuestras no se hablaban, pues, ¿no?
It's important to understand that everything around HIV has challenged different approaches, not only around the religious communities or religions, it's also around our own communities, indigenous communities and other communities that we're speaking about bodies, we're speaking about we're speaking about taboo issues, not only for the religious leader, but also for our community.
Yo creo en el caso de lo religioso y las instituciones religiosas, las y los activistas debemos ser mucho más creativos para poder relacionarnos con ellos. Quitarnos, por supuesto, esta idea de que la iglesia o las iglesias, el big, ¿no? El grande, es el que me está vigilando o el con el que tengo relaciones para poder trabajar. Y en realidad hay muchos tipos de iglesias, muchos tipos de fe que están ocurriendo en la vida cotidiana. Y yo creo...
I think we should be more creative as civil society and activists on how we relate with religious leaders. There are many kind of people working in the field as religious leaders. There are many different churches, and we should not assume that there is one single church that are observing us. We need to do a different work and approach them.
Hay representantes religiosos en lo local que realmente intentan de muchas maneras poder entender y acompañar los procesos locales.
There are grassroots, community religious leaders that they are doing a huge work on understanding what we need and how they work with us.
Como tú sabrás, y con eso cierro, John, como tú sabrás, desde Brasil hasta México tenemos la herencia de la teología de la liberación. Y supongo que de por ahí vienes. Sí, esa herencia, por lo menos en mi comunidad, en Juchitán, en este terremoto que tuvimos, y antes de eso en Oaxaca,
As you know, in many Latin American countries, we do have the tradition of what we call the theology of liberation. During some natural disaster like an earthquake in the community she lives,
tenemos una festividad denominada la Vela Mushe, y Mushe es una identidad indígena de género en el grupo zapoteca.
And we do have a celebration about la Vela de la Musha, and Musha is it's a community, it's an identity within our community.
Y hace un poquito más de 40 años la Iglesia Católica nos celebra una misa cada año.
And each and every year in our community, the Roman Catholic Church have a mass with us and for us, the Mush community.
Claro, con un módico pago, por supuesto, pero lo realiza. Y entonces esa religión, esa iglesia local, abre la oportunidad para que interactúe con las comunidades. Por eso creo que necesitamos ser creativos y aprovechar esas oportunidades. Son 500 pesos.
Of course, this celebration, this mass have a financial contribution from us to the church, but this is a golden opportunity for us to open, being creative and open a dialogue and celebrate with the church and our Mushe community, and this is very important for us.
Gracias. Cedric, anything to add?
Yeah. I have to say, first of all, I used to work with the Anglican Church in Burundi, and I can say they were so open, and they were the only difference maybe is when we're doing like raising awareness sessions, we had to start by praying. So this is maybe their only way to do things. I'm saying that to mention that religious leaders are also, some of them understand the fact that we need to do things differently. Maybe what is for them important is maybe how are we addressing these issues, including, their doctrine and also what language to use. And I think sometimes also we are judging them before we know how we can approach them. But also they need to be sensitized at a certain point. They need to be approached as, because I do believe they have enough influence on our community, and approaching them, trying to understand what is the doctrine of this, because the religious leaders is not homogeneous. It's very different and it's very diverse, and it's important to know what is the doctrine that we are using and how the language can be, our language can be combined with our language so that we can touch our community in a very effective way without going maybe beyond what they believe. And I do believe this is possible because I saw that I have evidence on that. I used to work with them. But what is maybe important also to mention is that we do have some judgmental in terms of how we work with different stakeholders, and we want to impose our principles, not taking into account what others think. But it's really important to define the language we are using and trying to make sure what is our central point with people we are working with. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Cedric. I think we have realized the important role that faith can play in the HIV response, both positive and negative. And I think it is important that we do find ways in which the religious sector, and I agree with you, it isn't homogeneous, is able to play an active and proactive role in the response. So to the young gentleman, thank you very much for coming to share your story. I see somebody behind the microphone there.
Yeah. So I'm Dr. Weng. I'm a country program manager from AIDS Healthcare Foundation, Myanmar. So firstly, thank you very much, you all, the panelists, sharing your experience. So as an international organization working for HIV/AIDS in Myanmar, we are also working for the prevention activities. The combination prevention is very good strategy and approach for the right now. So currently, my question is going to the ICT, using ICT in the prevention. So in Myanmar, currently the mobile coverage is around 90%. Then the people are also, most people, they use the local language. And then we also have some social media like Facebook. And then we also have some organization and the Facebook page for HIV prevention and information. So what I want to know is what is your suggestion for current situation? What would be better tools as a mobile application or as a Facebook page, which will be better? And then another thing is how can we market our application or page used by more people? There are some pages, but people, they don't go and see there. So that how can we market our page or application? So if you have something, so thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Kessia, would you like to?
Thank you. Great questions. And Myanmar is a fascinating country because the mobile use and the ICT use has skyrocketed so much in the last couple of years. It's just such an interesting place. I think it's really important to think, first of all, about what is the intended purpose and what do you want to do with the tool. ICTs, mobile, they're very versatile, and again, it's a tool that you can use in order to accomplish a variety of purposes. And so if the intended purpose is to perhaps give information, then Facebook pages are a really good way to do that. If it's a need to offer one-to-one support, then WhatsApp groups and Facebook Messenger are a really good way to do that, or to create some other personalized services. If your purpose is to mobilize and to create activism, then social media is a great way to do it. But I would go first of all to the purpose that you want, and then thinking about the types of media that are most appropriate for that. And I think it's really important to be user-centered in these types of considerations as well, and talking with the people that you intend to use or intend to build the intervention for, finding out what they're already using, what they're comfortable using. I'd say it's really important not to build something that's entirely separate from their everyday experience, but really capitalize on what they're currently using. And that's a great way to actually increase the reach and the use and engagement of your tool as well. But I think it's also really important to consider that there's a lot of people who are not going to actively participate in a tool. There's some really interesting statistics that show that perhaps up to 90% of a internet using population are what we call lurkers or silent consumers. They might not actually participate in a conversational way, but thinking about how can you reach them in a way where they can actually learn and become more inspired to accomplish the goals that you want to set as well, and considering the special considerations for that audience are really important.
Great, thank you very much, Kessia. Javier, I'd like to I want to come to you as a translator, as the voice of God, but also as an activist and the chair of the Global Network of People Living with HIV board. In terms of what you've heard around where we are in terms of combination prevention, do you have any reflections? Are we on track? Is there things we need to do differently?
Thank you. Yeah, if I'm not translating, I will be in the queue of the microphone. Thank you, Sean, for thinking about that. I think that when we are very behind, and I think that we tend to focus a bit too much on biomedical when we criticize. And if you open the whole concept of structural barriers, it's people-centered, it's human rights, it's enabling the environment, it's having a better legal framework, stigma, discrimination. And then you can go in all the discussion about treat all, U equals U, PrEP, etc. But you cannot approach one without the other two. And I think we are working in Latin America and the Caribbean very actively and in very nice partnership with the PAHO, in terms of the Pan-American Health Organization, in terms of not only promoting PrEP or treat all, it's about promoting the three dimensions which they have a synergetic effect. And of course, and I think Amaranta gave a perfect example, which is the transgender community, structural barriers it's one of the main priorities, not only to access to prevention, combined prevention, but also to treatment and care. And finally, I think we have been for a long time in the HIV response, and there is a cultural resistance about of thinking new paradigms. Prevention convention is combined prevention is a new paradigm, which is bringing together prevention and treatment. We have been complaining for 25 years about don't think in prevention or treatment separately, and now we do have this paradigm that works and will most definitely in the next few years reduce the number of new infections. I end here. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks, Javier. Please, the final comment from the floor, and then I'll ask the panelists just for some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much. Paul Gates from the United States. It's okay. The voice of God. And I have a challenging question for the panel, but before I do that, I've had the benefit of being in a number of sessions where Sean has been the moderator, and I just want to say that he is about the best moderator at this conference, and maybe my experience, and I want to thank you very much for that.
Very much. Thank you. Appreciate that.
So my question has to do with ICT and countervailing forces. Actually, in a session that Sean moderated yesterday that had to do about the civil society space, there was examples that were brought up about how social media is actually being used to tear down the work of the NGOs and prevention campaigns. One example was putting up photographs of children with smallpox and saying that this is what is happening by AIDS, right? So as the combination prevention programs go forward and embrace ICT and other types of approaches, when that pushback comes, when that countervailing force comes, and it can come like a tsunami, what should the combination prevention programs and campaigns first plan for initially, anticipate, and try to essentially protect their program against? Thank you.
I think it's a very good question for all the panelists to reflect on. So if you could all just spend 30 seconds to a minute and also include that in your concluding remarks. Kessia, can we begin with you and then work our way down? Sure.
It's a really great question. I think that it's really important to plan for the possible negative, as you say, countervailing efforts that might be made against our interventions. I think personally that a lot of NGOs, a lot of organizations have been a little bit late to planning really effective uses of ICT. And so I think that what we're seeing is a lot of really effective kind of grassroots use of ICTs in mobile, and we should capitalize on that. But I think that the sector at large really does need to think about what are the possible things that might happen, what are the possible messages that we need to plan against, and really capitalize on the potential power of ICTs in order to create really positive, strong spaces for people and to be there in places that are really relevant and go a long way toward myth busting. I think that's a really important role of ICTs and the use of digital technology in order to accomplish our collective goals. And also, sorry, just one more thing, and also to be within the realm of combination therapy, to think about the way that we can accomplish multiple purposes. So not only meeting the needs of the individual, but also being a really active resource to help people realize what resources are there for them and to create that collective sense of we as well.
Great, thanks, Kessia.
Thank you. have two things to say. So to have an effective prevention, we need to keep in mind that we don't have one solution. Reason why we need a combination prevention. And also to know that we are talking about human beings, which means that in every kind of approaches we are trying to initiate, let's think a little bit more, how can we work together with these people that we are talking about? I mean, key population, people living with HIV. And lastly, let's not lose time on behalf of our culture and I don't know, social norms, lose time arguing in politics. Let's go to the evidence and see what is in our country and make sure that we are really responding to the fact that we have in our country. And key population being that is not an issue. And also human rights is not an issue. The issue is how do we want our population to be treated and how do we want to end HIV if we don't want to combine all kind of means that we have in our hands. Thank you.
Merci, Cedric.
So a couple of comments, and I think you may have seen that WHO presence in the conference really pushed for the universal health strategy. And there has been comments about how this could actually dilute the efforts and investment in the HIV response. But I think we also have to think about some of the principles of universal health and greater investments in health in general, strengthening the first level of care, health promotion and prevention and community systems, and a great stress on quality. Quality not just in the dimension of effectiveness or safety, but also the humanity of service provision. So I think we really need to look at the common elements of the HIV response within the universal health and take advantage of those bridges. And a second comment, Amaranta and Steve next year is in Mexico, so opportunities for Latin America.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Grace.
Thank you so much. I think for me, I would like to actually start, first of all, to acknowledge the work that has happened so far, especially in rolling out combination prevention in the different countries that we come from. We are at a stage where our governments, with the renewed efforts after the global coalition, we are making some efforts to make sure that we are rolling it out. But I think we need to go back to the center and look at, because we started this conversation with personal-centered approaches. And one of the things that struck me today as we're having this conversation is who is defining the needs? Who is defining the prevention needs for the communities that we work with? For us, we might be talking about PrEP, we might be talking about condoms, but for a young girl, what she wants is a bursary. What she's caring about is, where am I going to sleep? Where is food? And I think that struck me quite a lot. For sex workers, it might be issues of safety. So we need to look at, when we're talking about prevention, how do we start looking at these other issues and cater our services towards the needs of the communities that we work with? I think that, for me, has been quite a big reflection through this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace.
Gracias, Jones. Quiero agradecer a Lorraine, que ya no la veo por aquí, por la invitación, a Javier, por supuesto, por incluirme en esta mesa. Y pensaba en lo que decías al principio, si pudiéramos hablar de un poco de los jóvenes, pero más bien quiero hacer una mención.
Sorry, I would like to acknowledge and say thanks to Lorraine, who was the person who was a focal point from the conference to organize this session. Thanks me for putting the session together. But I want to come back to a reflection about youth, young people.
Hace 2 días que la región latinoamericana se ha reunido, las y los activistas, un poquito más de 100 personas, muchas caras conocidas y unas bastante nuevas, de jóvenes sobre todo, Jones. Y ahora mismo, después de esta sesión, cierro mi mi participación de toda la conferencia pensando en que hay que regresar ya a nuestras regiones y poner un poco en marcha estas reflexiones mismas que estamos teniendo.
During the conference, we did have two Latin American meetings, very well attended, and this is my last session or my last activity in the conference, and I start thinking how all what I learned, what we discussed during the last few days in the conference will change and improve our work.
Y me voy con esta idea de la tarea de cómo vamos a hacer esa transferencia con las y los jóvenes en los próximos años, cuáles son estos, si podemos lograr ofrecerles respuestas a estas grandes preguntas que tenemos y cuáles serán las nuevas preguntas que ellos van a tener en los próximos 20 años, que esperemos tener ya una resolución de esta problemática.
Y por último, para cerrar, quería...
English, please.
Pues, lastly, for closing my remarks, yes, boss. We would like to think how we will start handing over to the younger generation some of the questions and some of the answers, how we can support them. So when we come together in 20 years, they will probably found all these answers and much more progress has been made. Thank you.
Mil gracias. I've put on the screen a framework which we use at the Alliance around combination prevention, and I think it encapsulates how and why combination needs to work and how it can work. And it emphasizes what many people on the panel said, is that you can't have the one without addressing the other two aspects. But in order for it to be truly effective, it does need to be evidence-informed, it does need to be rights-based, and it also needs to be community-owned. Because as a number of the speakers on the panel have indicated, that in order for something to truly be successful, it needs to be defined, shaped, and owned by the community where it's being implemented. To my panelists, a very big thank you for participating in the session, for Javier for translating. Thank you very much for translating. And to you, the audience, thank you very much for participating in this session. It's also my last session. I'm relieved. It's been a long week. Safe travels back home, and we will probably see you somewhere, somehow, sometime. Thank you, everyone.